Hello and welcome to PhDear Diary. My name is Andy Salkeld and this is my video blog and diary during the time of me doing a PhD at Leeds Beckett University. This is week 8, week 9, losing track of time now, but broadly speaking, we are well underway and my concept has now been kind of brushed out more. I am narrowing it down a lot, as you will have heard about on previous episodes. And this week I kind of want to talk about where I've got to with the title. Because the title and the question is one of the most important parts about kind of any work, really, because it's about how it's about knowing the direction, but also it gives you a point in all your work to look back to and say, well, is this doing what I wanted it to do to start with? Is whatever I'm doing the focus of what I care about? And particularly with something like a PhD, which takes many years, you need to know that everything you're doing across many different weeks and months and years is all related to the same topic. And so my the title, the thing I've been thinking about, and the thing I always come back to is Organisational Finance and Individual Psychological Outcomes. And that's very much it's not the question, but it's what I care about and it's what matters to me. So just to break it down, when I talk about organizational finance, I talk about whether it's revenue, how the business is financially structured, how its shareholder structuring works, all the aspects of finance that a finance team kind of manages and looks after through a business. So this is things connected to so as I said, revenue recognition. So how aggressive is pricing? How aggressive is their recognition? Are they deferring? Are they not? Are they subscription based? Are they contract winning, tendering processes, etc.? Then we get on to things like shareholders and ownership. So how much equity is involved? How many different shareholders are there? Is there like options, things like that? So all sorts of big finance questions, but also it's kind of connected to how people perceive the finance function. And this is something I kind of twigged onto, but actually it's so relevant because how we as other members of an organization, so as someone working in sales, someone working in operations, how we perceive the finance function will influence us as individuals. So if we see a finance function that is very stressed, that is very time pressured, that is working late constantly, does that change our perceptions of the business and different aspects of it, and does it in turn change ourselves? You'll see Pika basking in the glorious sunshine just behind us, and I think it does. When you see a stressed finance team, the implications of what you kind of see through that could be, oh, they're working hard to manage the business or to make sure that cash is where it needs to be. Maybe cash and financing is constrained. When you see them deadlines and pressured, it kind of, the implication is there is a climate of pressure within the organization and various things like that. Now, obviously, I've kind of done a bit of reading around it, and there's very little work that's done in this area. There's lots that cover kind of shock financing, so M&A, recessions, stuff like this. But there's very little that looks at the internal finance team. and the internal finance and workings of an organisation. So then when we look kind of at individual psychological outcomes, we then kind of think about, well, what are the individual responses to changes within an organisation? And this is where I talk about things like burnout and stress, and kind of like, you can say anxiety, depression, or you could look at general health. And then there's things like job insecurity, because obviously finance helps determine job insecurity or security. And there may be some extensions that get added on here, but those are where I'm starting for. And it's how those two very disparate things are connected. And what I'm looking at is the mechanisms of how organisational finance affects individual psychology. And this is where I'm looking at the parts of an organisation. So the leadership, the structure, the climate, and the culture. So the leadership of an organisation, if money is tight, if money is or if money is not, they will have different approaches to how they lead. Do they need to be kind of authoritarian or dictative, or can they be more relaxed and everything connected to that? Similarly with structure, where a business has seen success, it often tries to repeat that success, and therefore it becomes more structured. The bigger an organisation gets, the more structure it tends to have around it to repeat the successes of the past. And the climate and the culture are both kind of, well, the climate's related to perceptions from an individual, and the culture is the kind of shared assumptions about the organisation that are ingrained into stories, and kind of that they are, I'm trying to remember the word, they're institutionalized and they are sacralized. They become stories and kind of tales of success, of how the business overcame external challenges to survive. So those are kind of what I'm looking at. And what I realized as I was saying a lot of this to my supervisor was, actually, I need to kind of consider it, or at least pitch it, the other way. So, and this comes back to Simon Sinek's start with why. So I start by saying organisational financing and individual psychological outcomes. But you know what? Let's start with why. Why does individual psychological outcomes matter? Well, there is an increase in mental illness, stress, anxiety, depression, burnout. All these things are increasing, and particularly after things like COVID over the past couple of years. I know it still exists. I know we are still technically in a pandemic and everything like that. But there is all this stuff, and people are struggling. And that is a sad state of affairs. Everyone I talk to says, yes, it's hard. It's very hard. And now there are increasing kind of household pressures to do with fuel prices and food prices. So the actual levels of stress and incidences of mental illness within the population are growing. And there have been numerous campaigns to kind of get through this, but largely speaking, these are growing, and therefore it is becoming more and more important that we understand what is happening and how. So that's the why. Why does any of this matter? Well, it matters because people's livelihoods matter. and people's well-being matters. And people will say, yeah, but what about the businesses? Well, there is a strong connection between well-being and performance of individuals, and therefore profitability. And like much of the research on the aspects of an organization that I'm considering, so leadership, structure, climate, culture, has been done towards performance. And performance and kind of and profitability is where most of this work started, and it's only recently shifted onto well-being of the individuals. So when I say this, it's important because all of us as individuals and us as organizations and leaders of organizations, it's important because all of this is interconnected. And then once you've described the why it matters, because people deserve better lives, people deserve to enjoy their lives, etc. Then you look at how, and this is where I look at my processes, my parts of an organization, and it's kind of like, well, climate does this, structure does that, and this is the application of the competing values framework that I've talked about before. How you can look at these different aspects of an organization through the competing values framework, and you keep doing this, and you say, this is the how. This is how individual psychological outcomes are shaped. And now what we're saying is, and what's doing it? What is doing this? And that's the final bit, and that's kind of my story. And the what is, what parts of organizational finance influence the mechanisms of how onto the why. And I've finally been able, like, this is kind of the first week where I felt confident articulating that narrative, and it's an important part to get to, because you just need to be able to have the elevator pitch. I've worked with startups and small businesses for quite a while now, and if you're not able to quickly articulate exactly what you do, how you do it, and why you're doing it, people will not listen and you will not succeed, because that's how you get people's attention. And it's a very hard journey to come down, to be able to narrow it down into that one-liner. But when you get there, it becomes so much easier to be able to talk about what matters. So that's kind of the journey I've gone on over the past few weeks. And now what I'm doing is I'm coming up to what's called the confirmation of registration. So this is where you write this down. You say, here's everything I've done, here's everything I've found, here's everything I've seen, and now this is where I'm going. So this, from reading the document, this is about 3,000 to 6,000 words of essentially introduction. So when you're writing a PhD, it's essentially writing a book, and most business books at least have an introductory chapter that explains the whole thing without going into a lot of detail. And this is very much writing that intro chapter. And so what I'm doing is I've broken down my what, my why, and my how. And each one of those is getting around 500 words. So 500 words on individual psychological outcome, 500 words on each of leadership, structure, climate, and culture, 500 words on competing values, and 500 words on organizational finance. And then you build it out. You say, right, well, this is what we found from an initial literature search. Now what we're doing is we're going to start empirically testing it, and using kind of science and methodology to make sure that we are actually finding or developing good data, and from that, good information. And what I'll be doing after I've done all this description is then I will be kind of writing out the specific studies. So I know I want to start with one main study that essentially just looks at all of them and kind of does a theoretical model test. And so this is where you get into, which I still haven't looked at, structural equation modelling and everything like that. But I am basically saying this is my theory, and now I want to test it. You start with a big correlational cross-sectional study. Then what I'm intending to do is to put down 4 smaller studies, each looking at how organisational finance impacts culture, leadership, structure, climate, culture. And then, because a lot of the connections from each of those 4 points onto individual psychological outcomes have been looked at already. Those are kind of, they're not written in stone, but it's well documented how climate for X, climate for Y influences these things. But how finance changes those and then changes individual psychological outcomes, that's the new bit. That's the bit that no one has looked at. And that's what a PhD is. Finding new knowledge, new information, and being able to kind of help explain that and its uses. So that's kind of where I am with how this is going forward. And that's it's a really nice place to be able to say that. I personally have been struggling a lot with understanding kind of where I'm going, what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, etc. And I felt a bit lost over the past couple of months, as you will have seen through this. I have been uncertain, it's not been clear, but I'm finally getting there. And what I'm going to be doing now through writing it up is kind of solidifying these ideas. And then I get to start the studies, and that's the bit for me that is very exciting, because that's the bit where we're actually breaking new ground. And I am excited for that. Personally, I've been really struggling with sleep. I have been struggling to balance this with my other commitments and so on. So it's been a challenge, and I think I need to just push through to get this confirmation of registration written up and documented, because then I'm at a kind of, that's one milestone down, and then I just have to be pushing forward with all the studies to get them up and running and going. And then once the studies are going, then I can kind of backfill the writing of the introductory chapters, shall we say. And then we'll do another bit on, then we'll get the next studies done and move from there. And slowly but surely we will develop out this theory of how organisational finance can influence individual psychological outcomes. And that's great. I am still tired right now, so I'm a little bit disconnected and jaded. Haven't woken up properly, but I wanted to record this early, because what I typically do is I record this and then I kind of go running, but I need to actually stay in and be available to answer the door today because I'm having deliveries. So I wanted to get this done early, get it uploaded early, and then kind of carry on with the rest of my day. So that's kind of where I am, and I just wanted to be able to share that with everyone. The kind of quick overview of, we've got there. We've got to the title, and now we get to build out the confirmation of registration. And probably in time, I will try to share that with people. What I'm going to do is, once I've gone through the confirmation of registration process, got it all written down, then I'm going to update my website and include a lot of these documents and a lot of the research and a lot of everything like that I've referred to, because then it's kind of there for everyone to see what I'm doing. And then I will start talking about it on social media platforms and everything like that. Because at some point, I'm going to have to recruit people to do these studies. So I've got to start talking about it at some point. But I want to make sure that I'm confident in what I'm saying before I do those things. So anyway, that's a very quick, very whistle-stop tour of where I am right now, and I look forward to sharing more of this over the next coming weeks as I write up everything. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll speak to you in another week. Take care, everyone.